Hello, everybody. This video is looking at our continuing discussion and conversation about interest groups. From your homework, it's concentrating on objective 3, looking at explaining what makes a group successful and why small groups have an advantage over larger groups. And objective 4, looking at being able to identify and describe the strategies that groups use to shape public policy. So let's just dive right in here. And so, what makes an interest group successful? And when looking at making interest groups successful, there's a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration. Um, but there are many factors that affect, obviously, the success of interest groups, including the size of the group itself. You have to look at the intensity and the financial resources that these groups have. Obviously, money runs everything when it comes to interest groups and how this money can be funneled in. But small groups actually have an organizational advantage over large groups. And you might think, well, large groups have a advantage because there's more people, so there's more voices and there's more potential. But in fact, because smaller groups are just that, they're smaller, they're better organized. Most of their members are on the same page and they're moving in the right direction. So these larger groups sometimes are not as organized, and through this structural organization, creates problems for larger interest groups unless they are organized very well. So let's take a look at these three terms here that are on this slide. So, the surprising ineffectiveness of larger groups falls at the helm of what are known as potential groups and actual groups. So, potential groups. What makes large groups ineffective is the fact that sometimes you have these groups that have potential, that all the people who might be interest group members because they share a common interest. This doesn't mean that they're a good interest group. This doesn't mean anything other than there's just a lot of them that have the same ideas. In comparison, an actual group is the part of this potential group that consists of the members who actually join that interest group. So whether that interest group, you have to have some sort of financial donation to enter, or whether it is some sort of um, other type of membership like prerequisite, it creates a situation that groups vary enormously in the degree to which they enroll their potential membership. Um, so the bottom line, and here it says the collective good. When a interest group is concentrating on collective good, so something of value that cannot be withheld from a group member, they are letting those members know exactly what they think and exactly where they are moving, almost like a roadmap to make sure that they are on the same page. A couple of things here in looking at uh, this this idea, but there is an economist, and this economist by the name of Mancur Olson, he is going to basically point out that uh, all groups, as opposed to the individuals themselves, are in the business of providing collective goods. And we've talked about what collective goods are. But you get this free rider problem. Some people don't join interest groups because they benefit from the group activities without officially joining. So the larger the group, the more free riders you're going to have. These people that say they're a part of this, but really they're not uh, like going to be actively involved. So that is what makes this large group problem. Large groups are difficult to organize, as we've already stated, but this free rider problem, potential members, they decide not to join, but they sit back and let other people do the work. Um, I'm sure you all being in an AP class, you've been in a group project before to where a lot of the project falls on your shoulders because they're free riders and they're going to basically rely on you to do the work for them. Um, but these free riders will get the same benefits depending on what policies or what these individuals are lobbying for. So Olson, this economist, basically is going to say that the bigger the group, the more serious that the free rider problem is going to be. And he has a quote here: "The larger the group, the further it will fall short of providing an optimal amount of a collective good." So, again, the larger the group, according to this individual, he is saying that this is a problem. So, how do you overcome this? Is the question? Um, so, when you look at this law of larger groups, first of all, you have to say that it's easier to organize a small group with clear economic goals than it is to organize a larger group that has broader goals. Small groups just have this advantage given that its members' share of the collective good in a small group may be great enough that he or she will secure it. But in larger groups, each member can only expect to get a tiny share of the policy gains. That's an important aspect of this. So the advantage of small groups helps to explain why public interest groups have a hard time financially. In contrast, you look at like lobbying costs and benefits for businesses, they're very concentrated. So large corporations enjoy an inherent size advantage. Small potential groups like businesses have an easier time organizing themselves and getting things together and off the ground for political action and large potential groups, such as consumers. So, you take something like the NRA. I'm just using this group because I'm sure that most of you have heard of the National Rifle Association. Smaller companies that are going to support NRA and provide financial backing are going to be more easily, pushed into or formed into lobbying for the NRA because of the fact that they're smaller. And even though you do have larger corporations that are going to funnel into this NRA interest group, the smaller companies, like even ones that we have, like here in Bardstown, from the Kentucky Gun Company to maybe the Bourbon City Firearms, they are going to. It's easier for them to organize and to help these larger types of groups for the collective good, because again, smaller, easier to organize. So to overcome this, you have to provide what are called selective benefits. These selective benefits, these are good so the group can restrict to those who pay their yearly dues, such as information publications, travel discounts, group insurance rates, and other things that can be put into play and saying, look, if you provide us with financial backing, these are the things you're going to get in return. So this gives a little bit of it's almost like a reward for helping these interest groups financially, and that is what selective benefits ultimately are. So within all of this, you also look into. I don't know how I did that. All right. You also have to look into this idea of the fact that that smaller groups are better organized again, and it's easier as far as an intensity purpose for smaller groups to get that intensity. But at the same time, you have to look at the fact that large potential groups may mobilize through an issue about which people feel intensely about, so such as abortion. So like single issue groups. These single issue groups are going to have a narrow interest. They dislike compromise. They're just not going to compromise because this is what we're concentrating on and this is what we're doing. They single-mindedly pursue the goal, and characteristically, they are going to deal with issues that evoke strong emotions. Gun control, abortion, as an example. You might look at like different types of racial issues. So these single issue groups are very, very critical. And they play to people's emotions. And we see this every single day. If you pay attention to the news, you see it every day. Something coming out. Right now, you can even look at the push for vaccines for COVID-19. There are single issue groups that are out there, pushing for like emergency approval of this vaccine, saying that the quicker that we can get this vaccine out, then obviously the better off we're going to be. But you look at what the FDA has to do in order to make sure that this vaccine that we are going to be putting into our bodies is, one, going to be effective, and two, that it can be costly. And how does insurance and where does insurance play into this? And you also have to look at, what are these side effects? Are there effects for certain types of people, maybe with certain blood types or maybe with certain diseases that it might actually hurt them in the long run, even though they are getting the vaccine for COVID-19. So on this slide, I talked about multinational corporations as far as small groups are concerned, but successful because they are few of them and therefore have an easier time organizing for political action. Consumer groups have a difficult time getting significant policy gains because the benefits are spread over the entire population and not just singled for people here or there. It's the entire population, so that can sometimes be very difficult to control. Public interest lobbies seek a collective good. What they are achieving and what they are looking at materially benefit the membership activities of the organization, and again can in the long run create some greater population problems in trying to get policies passed and what they're lobbying for. So this is straight out of your textbook, this graph, and when you look at this, you have to look at the percentage versus what the particular membership is looking at here. So this is the benefits of memberships in the American Association of Retirement Persons. And this is going to illustrate how some of the members of this particular group, when they were asked when they had joined the organization, and obviously, when you look at this, the highest is just the information that they give. They join because of the information. And then you look at, well, they provide insurance, they provide representation, other benefits that are identified, the publications that they have, travel discounts, and, for social reasons. So you can see why they are joining. And still, even with some of these other like selected benefits, you have to say that the information that they provide is why people join particular groups. So again, going back to this idea of intensity, these single issue groups, they dislike compromise like we talked about, but groups may focus on an emotional issue. They play on emotions like we said. The intensity encourages non-conventional means of participation, so like protests. Sometimes this intensity with interest groups can turn into a problem because people get so wrapped up in the issue that they get tunnel vision. And what am I doing? What is best for this issue? But am I also doing what is best for everybody that's involved? And sometimes that is an overlooked issue or problem. As far as financial resources, just like we've talked about, not all groups have equal amounts of money. Monetary donations can translate into the access to politicians. Money, 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 people. Money, money, money. I wish that we could say that this was not true, but sometimes the access of money creates an opportunity for a phone call, an opportunity for a meeting, and in return, support for a policy. So the wealthier groups have more resources, and that's kind of a common sense characteristic. And presumably they're going to have more access, but they do not always win on policy, and that's a key. Just because you have money does not mean that the policy is going to win, and that interest group realizes this, but at the same time, money plays a huge part in how access is gained. So interest groups have exploded over time, and you can see in this graphic, there's from labor to health, sanitation, agriculture, social, religious, education. But from 1959, and this graph is 1995, so it's quite outdated from a textbook from 2008. But it's just kind of mind-boggling to think, okay, so in 2020, where or how many are there out there? And I couldn't even tell you, because interest groups are just have grabbed so much power because of money and their resources with politicians since really the turn of the century. Going into the 21st century, it's just been unreal. So moving on to objective number 4. So what we just looked at was objective 3. This is objective 4. Identify and describe the strategies the groups use to shape policy. Lobbying. And lobbying is a quote here. Communication by someone other than a citizen acting on his own behalf, directed to a governmental decision maker with the hope of influencing a decision. That's what lobbying is. I think you all know what it is. There are 2 basic types: regular paid employees of a group, and then temporary hires. So through both of these types of lobbyists, lobbying is going to be completed. Lobbyists, they're a source of information. They help politicians plan political strategies for legislation. These lobbyists are professionals in, especially if it's a single issue group, they're professionals in understanding where the constituents are, where they, what they support, what they don't support, and politicians rely on them for that information. They have ideas for innovations, for motivation, for ways to get constituents to get behind a particular policy and how to present it. And again, politicians, they ask for help and they get it. Mixed evidence as to whether lobbying actually works. It can. It can't. But the bottom line, when you look at this, almost an interesting stat, almost 90% of these interest groups, like their headquarters, guess where they are? Washington, D.C. And that is not by chance. That is obviously a strategical ploy of these interest groups to get into the minds of politicians. So lobbying is one way to shape policy. Another way that they use is what's known as electioneering. This is a direct group involvement in the election process. In doing this, groups can fund campaigns. They provide testimony and, again, ways to get members for candidates, and some form political action committees. So a lot of these interest groups form political action committees that are not going to necessarily, like we've talked about, give a direct donation to a um, uh, particular candidate, but for issues that candidates are going to support, then money will go to them. And again, that goes back to the campaign reform in 1974 that we looked at. PACs help pay the bills for increasing campaign costs, so they obviously are very important. So again, please make sure that you keep that in mind. A third way that policy is shaped is through litigation. So if an interest group fails in one area, guess what they can do? They can go to the courts and they might be able to provide a remedy. So this is looking at the idea that interest groups can hire one of your vocabulary terms, which is amicus curiae, which briefs to influence a court's decision. So briefs submitted by a friend of the court to raise additional points of view and present information not contained in the briefs or of the formal parties. So they're written arguments submitted to the courts in support of one side of a case that are submitted by a friend of the court. Most of the time, these are going to come through class action lawsuits. This enables a group of similarly situated plaintiffs to combine their efforts and to make one single suit against a particular organization, maybe even a politician, depending on what the issue is. So when these interest groups, when they go public, there is a public opinion that makes its way to policymakers. These groups are trying to cultivate a good public image, to build goodwill towards the public, use marketing strategies to influence public opinion and group of its issues, advertise to motivate and inform public about an issue. But they are trying to shape public policy by going to the public and showing what information is there and trying to build that goodwill amongst them and to motivate them to support particular issues and shaping public policy in those particular ways. And again, types of interest groups that we have looked at up to this point. Labor, agriculture and business, environmental interests, equality interests, consumer and public interest lobbies. All of this are very typical. And again, we do have those single issue groups as well. So again, how this all plays out is going to look at some different issues and how this is going to come into play. So we will take a look at objectives 5 and 6 in class on Thursday. If you have any questions, there are some questions you're going to have to go to your textbook to help you answer outside of the slide deck in this video. But if you need anything as far as interest groups or any of your assignments, please let me know. I am here to help you. Looking forward to seeing you on Thursday. Have a great couple of days, and we'll see you then.